Hey guys, Thomas Jr. here, aka Mustached, and I'm here to review the movie The Forever Purge. If you end up enjoying this review, then please consider joining my Patreon page. I'll be the second link in the description below. Any donations are greatly appreciated, and there'll be shilling at the end of the review, just as a reminder. And with the shilling out of the way at the beginning done, let's get into the movie review. So, just a little bit about The Purge in general. So, The Purge came out about a decade ago at this point, or close to that. And when I first saw The Purge, the first movie, I thought, yeah, this movie is a little bit of an oddity. A movie about, there's this one night within the year that any rules are, can be, well, most rules don't apply on that night, with very few exceptions. And that's pretty much the concept of the original Purge. And as such, it was one of the earlier movies where I could remember a very, or at least in the beginning, even a loose political sort of horror-esque type movie to deal with that. So, and as the franchise now has sort of been established, it only feels like it has become even more political and is definitely on the button-pushing side. The previous movie was literally called The Election Purge. It was all about whether or not people were going to vote to have it be kept in or removed permanently. And I thought at the time that they removed it permanently in that movie, at least from what I can remember. But apparently, no, that's not even true. Because this movie exists. So I don't know if this movie makes the previous one irrelevant or not. I don't know. Anyway, The Forever Purge takes that concept of no rules and applies it to, well, what if we just carried it over to the next day, and the next day, and make it last forever, making it even more ridiculous, because, one night of, you can accomplish in one night, with a purge. At least in what we see in the movie, see people killing people, or at least, stuff of that nature, even though when this, they showed the sort of prequel tense to this, where, people were just sort of partying because they didn't know, like, the full extent of what the Purge was capable of, and so on and so forth. And then the killing aspect took the dominance as soon as, the whole business group, the ones creating it, started to be like, hey, we're gonna lend some, credence to do that. So, with this, some purgers decide, that they're gonna make a forever purge. But let's get into the actual plot of the story, which, I wouldn't say the plots to these movies have been insanely crazy, like, good, but, entertaining, perhaps. But, anyway. So this movie starts in somewhere in Mexico, not exactly sure, some desert area. And as we are following these two people, they buy access to this underground tunnel, and they're looking for someone, I think their friend or something. Anyways, they reach the other side, and as I mentioned, with this being a political movie, we have some political news about how deadly, how this purge has been here for a while, and it's all consumed by hatred and whatnot. So that's something that remains consistent without the entire franchise. Anyway, we sort of hone in on this horse ranch where we start our movie in at least its characters. Uh, and we start with a horse whisperer, as the best I can describe it as. His name is Juan. Uh, this Hispanic character that works for very much a white group. So yeah, it should be explained now that the whole Mexico and United States and white thing is very relevant in this movie, and I'm just here to report what happens in the movie. Um, in terms of the whole border thing, I had thought that was, well, that problem is never truly solved, I guess, but, I thought it at least calmed down from the last thing I had heard from it, or maybe it was really crazy. Again, I haven't been keeping up with those type of events. So, anyway, back to the movie. So yes, there is going to be parts where I'm going to have to say the race because it is relevant to this movie's plot. Just gonna point that out right now. So, anyway. So he works there, and there's like a family that owns this ranch. Uh, we see a little tour of them, if you will. And we cut to his wife, this woman who, I forget her name in the movie, I do apologize. She works at a chef area, working there in the back. But anyways, more about tribal political stuff. A tribal leader of, I'm going to assume Native America descent. It's talking about, again, how much the hate is rising and how it has been rising for years. And, well, that is very much a little bit of a jab at, something that's based on reality about Native Americans and whatnot. But yes. So anyways, we cut back to our main two couple, Juan and his wife. And she wants him to learn English, as they are in America. It's going to allow him to more accurately say what he needs to say in terms of pure translation to what people are speaking. But he doesn't seem particularly too fond of it. And in the other household, the white household, the father doesn't want his kids learning to speak Spanish, which is a pretty dumb counter backwards way of thinking, all things considered. If there was ever a secondary language, I would think Spanish. Like, if English is like the number one language, I would either argue for number two would either be Spanish or Japanese. One of those two would probably be in the number two spot of languages to learn if you are going to learn a second language. Just based off of where your potential can lie in job market opportunities. And that's just being realistic. That's just me being realistic. That's all it is. Even within America, I would actually argue Spanish, again, at least in America, Spanish would probably be number two, if I had to pick one between the two. Anyway, back to the movie. So, as we see the wife trying to learn a bit more English, she's seeing people start to pack up and get ready for this year's annual Purge, because apparently, again, it's just back on. again, I don't know if this movie remembers if the previous movie happened or not, but whatever, we're here. So Purgers are getting ready, and as Juan arrives back to his job, he gets a little bit of an accusation thrown his way, being late. But he talks to his boss, who seems rather accommodating, at least at face value, what we see of him currently. He seems to have even a moment, if you will, with Juan, and saying, like, hey man, I get it. Things are tough, like, it's even within the aspects of America, things have kind of gotten out of hand. I just want to do right by my family, so on and so forth. That does break down a little bit further in the movie, but for right now, he does seem to be very genuine in his position of, like, yeah, I get it. The American dream. He seems to be that kind of character, in that it is open. But anyway, so they're getting ready after this little transition as the lockdown is getting ready, as per usual. Juan and his wife go to this bus to get to this other building to where they can hunker down with their friend that they were with, that they were trying to find at the very beginning. And we sort of fast time travel to the announcement, and we get the typical attacking of Purgers, as is sort of what is to be expected from these sets of movies. So, as they're sort of hunkering down, we have a little moment between the wife and how she explains why she believes in the whole, what she was mentioning earlier about wanting to learn English. She sort of has this idealistic, idea about what America could be, sort of expanding upon the positive elements that it can have, so on and so forth. But none more the case. So she believes that those values can be spread, and that can be beneficial. So anyways, as that's going on, we see a little bit more about the other group, the white group, the white family, and Dylan, the father, the one we sort of kind of focus on a little bit here, is making his rounds, getting the guns out, making sure everything's all ready. His wife is like, are you sure everything's okay? Everything seems fine. We see more Purge and stuff going on as they're like getting ready, and we sort of skip again as the alarms go off. So usually in the previous Purge movies, we get the Purge section, if you will, the initial one anyway, is usually the bulk of the movie. But here we sort of skip that because this movie is trying to, dictate that the Forever Purge, the next day where it would usually end, is going to continue on this trek. So Juan is driving with his friend, and they're driving off as they believe it is safe at this point in time. But they just miss, as they are heading out, a newscast being placed, and the newscaster gets killed off of, again, the Purge time. So the wife, as we are seeing the remnants of that, sees this little sheep in this little trap thing. And she ends up going toward it, thinking that she can disarm it on her own, for whatever reason, even though she had, like, a few people that were working with her. But she ends up getting caught in the trap, which is utterly bizarre, but okay. Um, and then her boss comes to, well, you know, we gotta get it back, cut to that. So people are coming in, more purgers are getting ready to attack. Meanwhile, the father is also getting attacked, so we're getting a little bit of back and forth. So she gets saved by her boss. I believe it's her boss anyway. Again, pretty surprised that no one inside heard her or went out there earlier, but whatever. So, as they defend themselves from these purgers and kill them, the cops just happen to arrive just as they had finished, and they get blamed for killing people outside of the purge, so they end up getting arrested. So, probably, really, so that was just actually bad timing. And, I don't know if they were trying to make a whole police do, the arrest during they do the bad arresting or whatever. But in this instance, I'll give the movie actually some credit. They get arrested, so the cops are doing their jobs, technically speaking, since, again, the purge is over. So, good on the movie. I gotta give it credit to doing that. That kind of caught me off guard. Now, what happens after that, well, we'll get to that anyway. So they get arrested. Anyway. So, while that's all going on, cut back to the White family, and they're getting held hostage as well by apparently one of their previous worker employees that was fed up. And he talks to them about how he's poor and how they're rich. And he wants to be a part of this forever purge to essentially kill them for being, well, rich. And the main guy, or the father, I should say, retorts that the purge was created by rich people. And we even see this glimpses of it in previous movie. That seems to be the case. Certain rich people that essentially did this. Which is why in the rules, there's certain people you can't kill, which is very convenient. Among other things, but But they sort of are going back and forth. He's yelling at the father about, like, how he took over this land by a more, bad mean, which is supposed to be his sort of downfall. But he's still retorting in a way that makes him seem a little bit more of a interesting character, one that gets killed at this very moment, but at least, they gave him something to do. It makes this character stick out where the other characters aren't too interesting by comparison. So yeah, the father gets killed. Not too surprised there. But as that happens, Juan and his friend help out. They assist the rest of them, the family. So as the cops are traveling, we cut back to the other group, the wife group. The cops are struggling as more calls are being, put on them. They're really confused because they don't understand why people are still purging, so they are reasonably confused, and then they get blown up. But, the people in the back surely survive this rocket launcher shot. And Juan is trying to get to them. So they move with the other family. So they sort of compile into one group looking for the wife. Juan's wife. So yeah, the police definitely get shot at, and during this little siege attack, Dylan sees some movement uh, as they're sort of moving forward in their own way. Takes down a few attackers, or one, I forget which it was. And meanwhile, the wife and the boss are also in the police van, struggling to fight off the two purgers that were with them in the van. And they manage to get those two, but then eventually Juan gets to them. So he guides them into reuniting. Oh, I actually wrote the wife's name eventually, because I eventually heard it in the movie. Her name's Alana. I do apologize for not mentioning it earlier, but again, in my notes I wrote that way down the whole line of events that happen anyway. So, now they're all reunited, so they head to a motel area and sort of mini supply. And we see that the NFAA, the creators of the Purge, are sending in their soldiers to sort of calm this situation down and clear the streets. Meanwhile, the big group, led now consisting of Juan, Elena, and Dylan and his family, the remainder of it outside of his father, are all together listening to the radio, and they hear that Mexico and Canada both have their borders open temporarily to let people that don't want to deal with this shit to get out, but they're only doing it for a certain amount of time. So they happen to be closer to the Mexican border, so they figure, why not cross over to Mexico? So they deal with wanting to go to Mexico. And we get this moment where, earlier in the movie, we see that Dylan seemed to be consistently, we heard him say about the whole Spanish thing. He doesn't want to teach his kids Spanish. But in his mindset, at least, he says that he doesn't necessarily even hate the other groups, him being Juan being Hispanic and all that. But he does think that they should be separated, which, there was a lot of fighting to end segregation, so it'd be a little bit odd to re-segregate, considering that, people are all mixed in at this point. We're way past that, so I think his mentality is a little bit behind, to say the very least. So anyways, so as they're sort of traveling, the roads get harder to travel, and they're forced to head out by foot. They had found a vehicle, but now they're heading in by foot. So they're moving down this alleyway, and they're taking down some Purge people, and as they're sort of walking down, we get this sort of clock of 2 hours left, and the movie does make a mistake, but it happens relatively quickly too, which is a bit embarrassing, but whatever. So they get to this theater, a lot of them, and they attack another Purge group. And as they leave and fight off these little inner groups, the time increases to 2 hours and 14 minutes. The time goes up for whatever reason. Anyways, as they head outside, they are unfortunately stopped by a group of people who essentially are very much in favor of the whole beyond segregation. We're talking good old-fashioned racism. So they want the Hispanics specifically to die, because they are lesser, But they manage to hold their own well enough. However, the friend of Juan gets killed in the process. He does end up getting killed. But the NFA arrive and also fire in upon this group, both of them, kind of. Because they're just trying to end this whole mess, and from a far enough distance, they seem like they could be purgers, so again, they're just kind of doing what they're assigned to do, I guess. So the rest of them, the people who survive, end up moving into this building, and there's a little bit of a mini separation that happens here for some reason. It's really weird. They just end up arriving in the same place at different times. Again, a bit unnecessary, but because they were just together, so I don't know what happened there. I think they cut a scene or something, I don't know. Anyway, as they're getting news updates, they learn that the army is being attacked, so Mexico and Canada are both closing their borders immediately. So they really have even less of a chance, but they figure that they can just climb on over another way, like a mountain pass. So that's what they're dealing with. So they head back out. So their little large group, that is now even larger when they went in the building, see that they are being followed. And they initially get the first set of purgers off of them, but the second group, taken off by a very obvious leader, keeps following behind. And so when they get to the mountain pass, Dylan, among Juan and his wife, stay behind to allow these other people that they've kind of come along into their path to let them up the mountain path and let them get to the safety first. So they're trying to hold off. So a big gun out happens, and the guy, there's attacks of people with arrows, of people with guns. We have people getting knocked out, like Elena temporarily, but she eventually gets back up. Just in time to save someone else. And the other group gets attacked as well, but they have their own set of fighters among them, so they're able to stop any incoming purgers from getting them. So Juan takes down the guy that wanted them dead, and eventually kills the leader. Meanwhile, as they sort of reunite in the final area, he reunites with Dylan, who has, with his wife, given birth to a new baby that is born in the Mexico within this new era of the Forever Purge. And speaking of that, after the baby is born, we get a little bit of a news finale as all the news stations that are left are all talking about, the Forever Purge, what will America be like now that that's a thing, and so on and so forth, and, etc., etc., how will save us. And that was the Forever Purge. So, this is one of those things where, I think the Purge as a concept, this is where you start to kick down the can, start to, how do you one-up, sort of, the Purge concept. As someone who watched the Purge series, as someone who watched the 3 previous Purge movies, I actually do think that they could have just kept it as an annual, yearly thing, and just, that alone, there's, I think, a lot you can do with that. Hell, you probably could have held off on the whole election purge for, I even thought that concept of, voting for it was a little bit, seemed like a ender, like a closer, as I kept mentioning throughout this. So the concept pushing to now it's gonna last forever, it does lose a little bit of its, I suppose, nuance, for as odd of a phrase that is to pull out in this review, since the Purge is kind of obvious in what it's trying to portray here. Uh, and it's trying to, it does feel a little bit more ridiculous in that regard about, but I don't know. Uh, I do think that the political stuff is actually pretty consistent from what I can tell from the other movie, so again, that's actually the stuff I actually like hearing in these sets of movies, has been the whole political stuff. Uh, and the other aspect, the one that struggles in some times, in this case, it's very apparent, are the characters. Um, because that's the thing about horror, and I've said it once and I'll consistently keep true to this as an objective truth, is that the more you nail the character, the better your character is written and placed in this world, in any horror movie. While you as a person might not be scared of what's happening, you can fear for a character, and that's to me the second best thing you can achieve in a horror movie. If you cannot scare your audience with the obvious jump scares, which this movie actually does have, um, the cheap tactics, when you can get your characters and write them in such a way where you're like, man, I really just want these characters to survive. We're talking about the classics like Ellen Ripley, like from Alien, just to mention an early example of a character you want them to survive the ordeal that they're going through, because they are a fully recognized character. And they're not an annoying type where you're just like, let the horror villain, kill him. That's not what horror should aim for, ever, I feel like. Again, the objective standard to me is that you should care about the characters, you should want them to survive. That is sort of, again, to feel fear for the characters if you cannot scare your audience necessarily. It's sort of a secondary, again, objective that I think these movies tend to lack more than they succeed in, which is, again, always unfortunate in the horror genre. Here, particularly, I didn't feel like a lot of the characters were that interesting. Juan wasn't too interesting. Like, the most I understood about this character was that he didn't necessarily, he was a horse whisperer that didn't necessarily want to learn English, and that's about really it. The wife was like part of a group that came over here through war, so she knew how to wield weapons, and that was about it for her. Dylan had his whole thing about like separation, which was bizarre, so that one was definitely weird. And protecting his wife, who is even more generic. And there's this other woman there with them that I think was in a love interest with the other friend guy. And then the daughters of their family, they completely get lost in the movie. I think they kind of just get left there at the cabin, and that's it. I don't remember them coming with them, so I don't really know what happened to those two. So this movie definitely struggles with even remembering some of its own characters. So again, to those people who made it this far into this review, if you're writing a horror movie, again, I always try to, when I'm now criticizing movies, I feel like it's also equally important to talk about, well, how can people watching this, how can they improve? How can the future of people making the future content improve? And again, character, character, character. I cannot emphasize it enough. But anyways, that is my review of the Forever Purge, and if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One to head over to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations are greatly appreciated.